Hi everybody, welcome to the South East London Folklore Society. We're having a post-match quiet one today. It's a double header, which is about dormice and mandrakes, and Dave just said of mice and mandrakes. This is what I should have called it. But thanks for that. If we ever do it again, that's all we're going to call it, and we will do copies. So yeah, this is South East London Folklore Society. We're going to have a talk from Chris here on Mice and Mandrakes, and then I'm giving a talk from Mandrakes. So I'll switch on the mic if you can't read.
Right, dormice. Yes, today I shall be talking about dormice, but also a wombat. Now, the dormouse, of course, is well known for its appearance in Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, where it would famously utter cryptic and half-finished sentences and it lived in a teapot. But was it a dormouse? Tenniel's illustrations depict a far larger animal than the 1-inch long hazel dormouse, which is Britain's native dormouse. It is believed that this little sleepy character there between the hair, sort of got his eyes shut there. It's thought to be this was inspired by Dante Gabriel Rossetti's pet wombat, who was called Top for some reason. This is a sketch of the wombat, and Rossetti kept him at his home in Cheyne Walk, Chelsea. And apparently Top would sit at the dinner table and would fall asleep sometimes, much like the dormouse at the tea party. So we know that Lewis Carroll Dodgson was a visitor to Rossetti's house, and apparently he was quite fascinated by this wombat, as was Rossetti himself, who wrote the following verse. "Oh, how the family affections combat within this heart, and each hour flings a bomb at..." Let's see where this is going. "My burning soul, neither from owl nor from bat, can peace be gained until I clasp my wombat." And indeed, Rossetti was so distraught when his wombat died that he had him stuffed and placed in the entrance hall of his house. So that's wombats. Dormice. As well as the famous dormouse or wombat in Alice, there are numerous other literary references in English literature. So famously, Byron wrote in his journal, "When one subtracts from life infancy, sleep, eating and swilling, buttoning and unbuttoning, how much remains of downright existence? The summer of a dormouse." Indeed. They've also been used as a byword for timidity and weakness. So some revenge tragedies, Jacobean tragedies, John Webster's The Duchess of Malfi. "I find by his eye he stands in awe of me. I'll make him as tame as a dormouse." And then Cyril Tourneur's The Atheist tragedy, again, "Why, sure, this generation was asleep, and she begot those dormice, and she made them up so weakly and perfectly." So there's a byword for timidity. In the Twelfth Night as well, Fabian and Sir Toby Belch are trying to encourage Sir Andrew Aguecheek to fight a duel, even though he's a bit timid, and they're not really very confident in his fighting ability. "She did show favour to the youth in your sight, only to exasperate you, to awake your dormouse valour, to put fire in your heart and brimstone in your liver." So this is a common theme of this dormice, rather timid and shy, which is not the case for the larger dormouse that I've encountered, because they're quite vicious, but I'll get on to that later. One other literary dormouse reference, in Great Expectations, in Miss Havisham's house, Satie's house, it's portrayed as a sleeping palace, Sleeping Beauty. I think Dickens was alluding to those kind of ideas. So the porter, Miss Havisham's porter, Orlick, is described by Dickens as a human dormouse. Small room, small proportions, his patchwork covered bed is in a little in the division room. So he's a confined, sleepy-looking man with a strange dormouse expression. But returning to Alice and this teapot business, would it be possible to put a dormouse into a teapot? Probably not a wombat. However, a hazel dormouse, hand therefore scale. This is Britain's native dormouse, as I said before. There are 2 dormice in the country. This is the most likely candidate, because no matter the size of a teapot, I'm sure you can probably compel or persuade the dormouse to get in there. Depends on your teapot, depends on your dormouse, but if you're talking about the hazel dormouse, yes. So they're part of our literary culture and in some cases artistic culture. The Archibald Thorburn on the left, the wildlife artist, he did several dormice. One's particularly looking down at the ground, thinking of inspiration for his next poem. They're also part of folk culture, and we can see that from the many different names for dormice throughout England. I say England and Wales because they're generally now found in the south, not really in Scotland. But Cornwall and Hampshire, they were called dory mouse. Devon, they have derry mouse. Yorkshire, there's dozy mouse or dozing mouse, which is thought to come from Old Norse dosa to doze. Berkshire, sorry, it's the sleep mouse. Yorkshire again, Shropshire, East Anglia, the sleeper. It's quite poetic, the sleeper. And in Warwickshire and Hampshire, the seven sleeper, which is referring to the legend of the seven young men of Ephesus who went into a cave to escape religious persecution and woke up 300 years later. So we have all these different variations of names. The oddest one is in South Devon, the Cheswell crumb. And I did try and find what the derivation of that was. I'm completely stumped. Even the name dormouse, we're not exactly sure. It's either from Anglo-Norman dormius, which is the sleepy one or the sleeper, or it could be, as I say, Old Norse dusa to doze. Victorian children often kept them as pets. They were quite tame. They were often found in fields by farmers. Beatrix Potter had one, which she was very fond of. It's called Josiffe. On October the 18th, the death of poor Miss Mouse, otherwise Josiffe, I was very much distressed because she had been so sensible about taking medicine that I thought she would get through. But the asthma got over her one night, and she laid herself out in my hand and died. Poor little thing. I thought at one time she would last as long as myself. I believe she was of great age. Her nose and eyebrows were white. Towards the end of her life she was quite blind, but affectionate and apparently happy. I wonder if ever another dormouse had so many acquaintances and various friends like Millais, the artist, would come and visit the dormouse. So that's Beatrix Potter. If we now return to dormice, but the other dormouse, which is the edible dormouse, or gliss. They're also called fat dormice, but I don't think they particularly like that. It's not the sort of expression they like to be known as. They prefer to be called the great grey dormouse or king of the woods. So these almost certainly weren't present when Dodgson wrote Alice. They were around the time of the Roman invasion because the Romans brought them over. These are the ones that Romans ate. There's a recipe in Pusius. I won't read the Latin, but briefly, take a dormouse, stuff it with pork and small pieces of dormouse, so dormouse, all pounded with pepper, pine nuts, assafoetida and broth. Put the dormouse thus stuffed in an earthen casserole, roast it in the oven or boil it in the stock pot. And we know the Romans did bring them over to Britain because, there we go, this is a glirarium, dormouse pot, which was found near a Roman villa near St Albans. And what would happen is they would sit on the ledges and you can persuade them in pears and apples, and they'd throw cold water over the outside to keep the temperature down so they would be more likely to sleep and not rush around and try and escape. This one's obviously quite pissed off and he's looking for a way out. So that's a gliraria. As far as we know, they were extinct, as I say, by the time of Alice. They were reintroduced to England in the very early 20th century, 1902, by this lunatic Lord Lionel Walter Rothschild, who is actually quite a serious naturalist, but definitely eccentric. And he imported a few pairs from Central Europe in around 1902, and he released them in the grounds of his mansion at Tring, Hertfordshire. And I'm sure the idea was it would just be a few of them would breed and they would be an ornamental addition to the park. But in fact, they bred like crazy, and now there's thought to be 10,000, 20,000, no one's quite sure. But the beech woods and pine woods around Tring, it's just perfectly suited for them. It approximates their homeland in Hungary and Slovenia. So in an area roughly Aylesbury, High Wycombe and Hemel Hempstead, which is sometimes called the Dormouse Triangle, they're all over the place. And they've become quite a notorious local visitor because they get into people's attics and chew through electric cables and destroy the car and things. Here's a young one. Now, this was my companion, another dormouse botherer. So what you do is you go to the woods, volunteers, and they're all sleeping in birds' nest boxes on trees. Take them down, empty them out into a plastic bag, and then you can weigh them, sex them. They've been microchipped, so you can see how old they are. The oldest was about 9 years old, they're normally about 5 years, but this was Old Whitey, I think his name was, because his whiskers were going white. That's a young one. Looks very pissed off, obviously, as I'm sure I would be if I was woken up and thrown into a bag. They are bad-tempered. I did see another volunteer who didn't have these big gloves, and she was bitten. And the difference between a squirrel and a dormouse is that the squirrel bites, it will just bite and then go, but a dormouse will hang on, so it can keep the wound open. So if you're going to do this, wear gloves. Why did the edible dormouse not spread all over the country like the grey squirrel did, which was introduced about the same time? It may be the case that motorways have prevented them from coming into London, but I think it's quite likely that they are quite particular about this combination of pine and beech woods, because they eat the beech nuts, and they won't go anywhere else where that isn't the case, whereas squirrels are very adaptable, and anywhere there's acorns, don't have to be ripe, they can eat those. Looks like some gliss have tried to escape, because they were found in this ticket machine. There at the bottom, there was a family of 4 were found. Maybe it was a bid to get on the train, go to London. They are admired and liked certainly by myself and by some people in this area, but they're feared and disliked by others. And they have been called the scourge of the Chilterns. Because what happens in winter, they really need warmth, so they go into people's houses. Often in the lofts. There's one unfortunate lady living near Tring who had found that she was inadvertently hosting 65 gliss in her attic. And they're nocturnal scamperers. They come out about 11 o'clock and they just start running around and dancing. This has sometimes given rise to stories of ghosts and hauntings. They chew through, as I say, electrical cables. Rather inconveniently, they'll drown themselves in water tanks. There's an article in the Daily Mail called Invasion of the Gliss, which, not very surprisingly for the Daily Mail, it concentrated on the threat to house prices. So a homeowner forced to call out pest controllers in her £750,000 seven-bedroom property said, they get in through small holes in the loft, and once you get rid of one lot, their mates come back in no time at all. We had a lovely dinner party ruined because around midnight people kept asking, what the heck was that noise coming from the roof? They keep us awake at night, but if we hurt them, we could be fined. They're protected under there's a European law directive about protection of dormice. So naturally, dormice are very concerned about Brexit and the implications for them. So this lady carries on, she recalled how a neighbour had found one gliss sitting in a wardrobe, having chewed through a woolly jumper, just looking for warmth. That's all they're doing. The area contains many highly desirable and expensive properties, and some residents even fear their house prices could suffer. I don't think the dormice care at all about the house prices. I think they just want warmth and the occasional pear or muesli. They've been known to come into the kitchen and sometimes get the muesli. Should we move on to Alistair Crowley? He may have had more positive feelings about edible dormice because during World War II, he was living in Jermyn Street, just behind Piccadilly, and it was bombed out. It was the second Blitz. And he moved to this lovely Bell Inn, 17th century, in Aston Clinton, near Tring. And this is bang in the heart of dormouse country. And they are known to have invaded the local church in Aston Clinton, St Michael's, where, anti-Christian and Hellenic spirit, they chewed through the organ pipes. This is the same church where, according to Kenneth Grant, Crowley proclaimed the law of Thelema and announcing the twilight of Christianity. So I think some of the spirit of Crowley lives on in this area. And if you see, I'm sure you can see there's a very close resemblance. Perhaps there's a reincarnation thing going on. I've stayed at this Bell Inn. It's fantastic. It's a lovely place. You can ask for, I think it's room 11, which is where Crowley stayed. But also Keith Richard lived there for a while, because I think he was on trial. Aylesbury Crown Court, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, and you will get dormice around at night. It's marvellous. I was disappointed. I went to the Warburg Institute. I was looking through Crowley's diaries to see if there was mention of him being confronted with a big fat dormouse. He did go on nature walks. There's some lovely descriptions of sunsets and trees and woods, but unfortunately there's no mention of dormice. And I wondered if it's because even if you heard them, you wouldn't recognise it. I do have an audio clip. I don't think you're going to hear it, but it's something like very loud. And when you go into the woods, they will start calling to each other. I'm a dormouse too. I'm one too. I'm over here. And it's quite a loud noise, but you wouldn't think it was a rodent. It's rather like if you've ever heard a squirrel alarm call. It's not, I don't think it's natural what you think a squirrel would do. For years I thought that was a strange bird. So it's quite possible that Crowley met them and didn't recognise them. I won't play the audio clip because it won't be heard sooner or later. Let's do a dormouse. What I did find in the Warburg, which made up for my disappointment of the Crowley diaries, was this wonderful engraving from a Slovenian historian. This was 1689. This is all about the legend of the devil as the shepherd of dormice. So just as I've made this rather tenuous connection with Crowley in Slovenia, they have a very definite association with the devil, who is said to be their shepherd. And this is also in other Central European Balkan countries. A friend of mine who in the early 90s was a journalist, and he was covering the wars in former Yugoslavia. And he recalls one night he was taken out to what was the front line between Croatian and Serbian forces. And it was at night, and it was near the woods, and he heard this strange conglomeration of sounds. So there was gunfire, and there was something else, this. And he said to the Serbian guys, what's that sound? And they said, that is the devil's choir. So they do have this reputation. So what the theory is that these weird sounds people would hear from the dead of night gave rise to fears that there was something supernatural going on there. This is an academic paper which explored these legends. Among the rural population in 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, a myth about the devil represented by the dormouse shepherd was widespread. The devil, the dormouse shepherd, clicked, whistled and made a hullabaloo whilst chasing dormice through the woods. It's not made clear why the devil would chase the dormice through the woods, but nevertheless, even after an explanation for the myth was found that the clicking, whistling and hullabalooing was produced by an owl, even in 1840, this is in Slovenia, the original myth was still deeply held by simple people. And the article goes on, the myth was the basis for the novel by Josiffe, An Autumn Night Among the Slovenian Dormouse Hunters. Sounds like a cracker. 1865, and it's interesting to note the story was still alive after the Second World War, and they still do an annual Dormouse festival where they try out their favourite traps and they see who's caught the biggest dormouse. So it's very much part of the collective memory of rural life in Slovenia, which is continuing. This article goes a bit strange. Returning to the myth, I would like to comment on the analogy between the dormouse keeper, the devil, and the god of shepherd cults, Pan, who expresses animal cunning. So Pan is, I think, identified with the dormouse. Is animal cunning also typical of the dormouse? Panic, derived from Pan, confuses the spirit and brings disquiet to the senses. Does this state of mind of dormouse hunters turn them away from the devil? Is this the restless libido that, according to medieval morality, should be suppressed? or is it allowed to be transformed into a passion for hunting? Neoplatonic Christian philosophers, Pan, synthesis of paganism, the mysterious clicking of the dormouse foretells the death. I think she's losing it. Dionysus, Jupiter's thigh, dormouse. The point is, can the dormouse be regarded as Dionysus? No. And what are the roles of the devil in the dormouse hunter? Obviously, this is a matter of great concern in Slovenia. And she talked to some of these dormouse hunters. It is interesting that my informants did not show much pity for the dormouse, but they do feel compassion when they're talking about deer. We could say that people show an ambivalent attitude towards dormouse. On the one hand, they suppose it to be bad, disgusting. On the other hand, they like its fur, admire its intelligence. So I think this is very different to how we would see them with their big black eyes and pink noses and sort of Disney-looking characters and say, oh, aren't they cute? It's a very different attitude to them. Possibly because these people are hunting what is actually a tiny, sleepy mouse, and they're trying to justify why they're hunting it. But it's definitely these associations go back centuries. The name in these Balkan countries, in Slovenia it's Poch, in Croatia it's Puch. So it's related to Puck, Puka, Puki, all these spirits, demons, Puck, devils. So this is going back a long, long way. As I say, it's part of the folklore in Slovenia where they're still hunted. There is a dormouse hunting museum. You can see all the hats and gloves and all the different traps they've made. They're very obsessed with this. In Germany, however, they have more saintly associations, so that the name for the edible dormouse is the Siebenschläfer, the seven sleeper, which, as I said, it's derived from the legend of the seven young men near Ephesus who sought refuge, slept in the cave, and woke up 200 or 300 years later, by which time Christianity was the state religion. In Poland, there's another name still. They're called Populica, which is named after the wicked king Popular, who was a tyrant and oppressor. And he was only overthrown when he took refuge in a tower, and an army of mice stormed the tower and ate him, and ate his wife too. So there is another idea of mice, that if you get on the wrong side of them, they will eat you, so be careful. As a broader category of mice in general, there are, of course, supernatural and mythic associations, with thinking of witches, familiars, small animals. Very often mice appear. I've just taken a few from some Essex witch trials. Dorothy Waters, a woman from Clacton in the county of Essex, accused of having employed and fed an evil spirit in the form of a diamond-coloured mouse. Bridget Mayers from Holland, Great Holland in Essex, did entertain, employ and feed a spirit in the form of a mouse called Prick Ears, which is apparently a name that crops up again and again in these witch trials. Prick Ears, a name for a mouse familiar. Joan Cooper, she saith that she hath been a witch about 20 years, and hath 3 familiars, 2 like mouses, and the 3rd like a frog. The names of the 2 like mouses are Jack, and the other Prick Ear, and the name of the 3rd like a frog is Frog. There's more, but I won't go into it. It's all a bit repetitive. But the point is, there are lots and lots of mice as familiars. Why were mice feared? Does it go back to certainly the Old Testament? They've got the status in Leviticus as unclean things. These also shall be unclean unto you. Among the creeping things that creep upon the earth, the weasel and the mouse, and the tortoise after his kind, and the ferret and the chameleon, and the mole. They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens behind one tree, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together, saith the Lord. In Samuel 1, there's a smiting of plague, and the people decide to send the ark back. They've stolen the ark. They think that's what's given the plague. So they ask the priests and diviners, what should they offer to avoid the Lord's wrath for having taken the ark? What shall be the trespass offering which we shall return to him? And they were told 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. So again, they are seen as something unpleasant and something to be wary of. The golden mice is actually a variant on quite a common theme in classical sculpture. Small statuettes of mice are perhaps one of the most common animal depictions in bronze from the Greco-Roman world. It's from the American Journal of Archaeology. Statuettes attached to bronze oil lamps, candelabras, lampstands, depicting mice gnawing at wicks and drinking lamp oil. I think this is probably partly because of the idea of the threat of mice eating grain, breaking into grain stores. The association of rats with disease, although it's false, is another reason why there should be kind of a very primeval fear. As you may have guessed, I'm very fond of mice, squirrels, rats and so forth, but nevertheless I have experienced some very vivid and unpleasant nightmares of sinister rodents on long legs, a little bit like this Austin Spare, strange looking ratty creature on the right. And it made me wonder if I'm such a sort of rodentophile and I'm having these horrible nightmares, is there something very, very deep in the unconscious? And maybe this does go back to prehistoric times when they were threatening the survival of the community in winter. They were going through the grain stores. There's also a more abstract sense of horror at the profusion of the idea of swarms and contagion, hundreds and hundreds of mice. You see one, it's very cute. If your house is overrun with hundreds of them, it's not so nice. The pop academic Camille Paglia in the 80s talked about this sort of nightmarish quality of nature overproducing swarms of flies, tadpoles as more than is necessary. There's something rather disturbing about this. The contagion, I said association with witches, but the idea of witches causing bad air and plague. This is still widespread in the 16th and early 17th century, and there was this weird idea that rats and mice and toads were generated from putrefaction, and this is in Ovid's Metamorphoses, and it recurs in Renaissance works of natural philosophy. Pliny mentions it, mice generated of putrefaction, but Cornelius Agrippa reiterates this. All animals generated without manifest seed is monstrous, and they claim that mice sometimes generated by coition, but sometimes of the putrefaction of the earth. So there are these strange ideas about how they're produced and why they're rather, something that's rather disgusting, in contradiction to our own ideas of lovely little Tom and Jerry type mice. I could continue. Obviously I've got many things to say about squirrels, not least the Witch of Wapping's familiar squirrel, but time is marching on like a dormouse's waking life, draws inevitably on to October and the big sleep. So I will finish here with some dormouse art. There's a spare, yes, there is at the end, self-portrait with rodent. It's up to you to decide what rodent it is, but he seems to be quite fond of them. I shall leave it there. Thank you. It's marmot.
That was ace. I think we might want to maybe do a little bit of Q&A now, and then take a break, and then do the Mandrake thing. I've just got. What was quite interesting is I didn't realise the Witch of Wapping had a mouse. Was it a mouse?
A squirrel.
A squirrel.
Yeah. Which must have been a red because at the time.
So it was summer. Many years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
there are chapbooks and pamphlets.
Yeah.
I think she sailed down the Thames, didn't she?
She lived on Spruce Island. But anyway, several things. We had somebody who gave a talk, a herbalist was talking about cunning folk practice, and she was talking about superstitions about shrews. Now, farmers, particularly dairy farmers, were terrified of shrews because they thought that shrews would bite the cattle and bewitch them. So they would avoid fields which had shrews in them. And if they did catch a shrew, what they would do is they would, it's not very nice, but they'd drill a hole in a tree, and they would put the shrew into the tree, and then basically wedge, block it off, and as the shrew died, it's like synthetic magic. Shrews around would die. And the other mouse, kind of Gratus legend that I could think of, is the one-eyed grey legend.
Yeah.
Which is do you know that one, the London one? the Toshers, the Victorian kind of sewer dwellers, they believed that there was a giant queen rat who could change her shape into a human with one eye grey. And she would come above ground, go to the gin palaces where the Toshers lived, and would seduce a Tosher. And if he had pleased her, she'd bite him and then change back into a giant rat and skitter away. And from then on, all her little ratty friends would push gold and silver to the Tosher's questing fingers, and he would become a rich man. And there's also an island called Rat Island, isn't there, in Thames Estuary? So that's just a few comments, really.
What happened if one didn't like them?
You'd have bad luck.
You just wouldn't find.
But the thing is you'd find that as you go up the estuary, so if you did get blessed by the rat, it would also mean that any of your children would have one eye grey and would be known as rat-born. As you go down the estuary, it would become two eyes grey, and it tended to be kind of associated with different fevers.
That's more what one would expect, isn't it? The association with disease, which is, it's echoed in Bram Stoker's factory when Dracula's coming over with a lot of rats.
I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about the cursed animals, because, I mean, in the Mandrake talk, spoiler alert, the French think that Mandrake is a mole. So that's interesting. But anyway, whilst we're here, let's see if there's anybody's got any questions.
I'm interested in the golden mouse, because the golden hamster was a wild Syrian creature. And I don't know, there might not be any connection, but that just sort of came to mind as you were speaking.
It's a weird chapter, because what I didn't mention is, as well as offering 5 golden mice, they were advised to offer 5 tumours.
Really?
Yeah, so it's a plague association. It's that in the King James Bible, it says emeralds. It's emeralds, but you know how all these Hebrew words are often translated in very different ways. But it seems to be the association is plague. What a bizarre thing to make a model of a tumour. Animals. There's other references to them. It's kind of golden. As if the small size belies that power, that there's something powerful and sinister about them. Which I think is to do with the threat to grain, which would have been catastrophic in those kind of countries.
Time for the mystic mandrake. Here we go. So mandrake, also known as mandragora, has a mystic history stretching back over 3,000 years. There are very old rites, customs and magical ceremonies associated with its harvest, which is believed to be very dangerous. It's been used in medicine for thousands of years, and it's the earliest known drug to have been used as general anaesthetic. It was believed to possess the power to remove sterility and stimulate passion. And it was often thought to be more than a mere plant, more like the home of or embodiment of a demon or evil spirit. The root can have human-like shape. Now, this talk, by the way, I tried to keep it kind of chronological, but it kind of dots about just a little bit. I just thought I'd give you a heads up there. The botanical, this is what it looks like in the reel there. The botanical name for it is Mandragora officinarum. There's a bunch of different ones, so you kind of like get Mandragora autumnalis, and then you get the spring one as well. But they all kind of come in this genus, and it's in the same plant family as deadly nightshade, and it's native to the countries bordering the Mediterranean, particularly the eastern Mediterranean. So you'll kind of like Sicily, Crete, Greece, kind of like warm bits of Italy, Israel. You also find it in Syria as well. It was introduced into England in the 10th century. In temperate climates, it tends to need careful cultivation. After writing this talk, kind of researching this talk, I've decided to get a greenhouse, give it a shot myself. The earliest story that concerns mandrakes is in the book of Genesis, which means that it's existed in written record for around about 3,500 years. The little chap there, that's Reuben, and that's Rachel and Leah. And so I'll kind of paraphrase the story. When the wheat harvest was being gathered, the boy Reuben came across a plant with yellow berries. He tasted the fruit and found it sweet, so he brought some back to his mother Leah. Now Leah's sister Rachel, who was with her at the time, recognised the berry and said, "Give me, I pray, the fruit of thy son's mandrakes." Now Rachel was childless, but Leah did not want to give her the mandrakes because they were both married to the same person. They were both married to Jacob. And Leah said, somewhat annoyedly, "Is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband, and wouldst thou also take away my son's mandrakes?" So Rachel cut a deal with Leah that Leah would be able to share. Leah would share the mandrake berries with her, but Leah would get to sleep with Jacob that night. So it was kind of like a timeshare husband affair. Leah met Rachel from the fields. He had been working that day, saying, "Thou must come unto me this night, for surely I have hired thee from Rachel by giving her some mandrakes Reuben found." And thus Leah conceived and gave birth to her fifth son, Ishkar, and Rachel conceived and gave birth to her son, Joseph. So this is the earliest record of mandrakes. And as early as the time, and there's a picture of the fruit of the mandrake there. As early as the time of Genesis, the fruit of the mandrake had a reputation for being an aphrodisiac and for being able to help barren women to conceive. In fact, the ancient Hebrews called them love apples. There is another version of the story of Rachel which says that Reuben, the little fella there, was tending to his father's donkey during harvest time, but he accidentally tethered the donkey to a mandrake root and found the donkey lying dead beside an uprooted mandrake, because uprooting the mandrake is very, very dangerous. As this other story says, the plant has a peculiar quality of killing whoever tears up its root, so man turns to an animal to receive the fatal effects. Now, some believe that the magical substance that the ancient Egyptians used to make their elixir of life was the mandrake. It's also claimed that mandrakes were kept in shrines in ancient Egypt in the home as household protectors. The Assyrians mentioned mandrakes in texts on clay tablets from about 800 BC, but they're fairly prosaic about it. It's for a cure for toothache and for acid stomach. Now, the ancient Greeks were very well aware of the properties of the mandrake, which is indigenous to Greece. Here's Hippocrates, or as Bill and Ted would say, Hippocrates, the father of medicine. He lived around about 400 BC, and he regarded the mandrake as a medicinal rather than a magical plant, and he recognised it as a narcotic plant. He said, "A small dose of mandrake in wine, less than would occasion delirium, will relieve the deepest depression and anxiety." And he also recognised that mandrake was one of the plants which would induce slumber. Now, the Greeks wrote about the magical power of the mandrake and rituals of harvest. So they would, one of the rituals you'd say was the operator should draw 3 circles around the plant with a sword and cut it while his face is facing towards the west, as to avoid the evil odour arising. And at the cutting of the second piece, he should dance around the plant and say many things about the mysteries of love. Now, the rite of drawing 3 circles around the mandrake is to form a spiritual barrier protecting the operator from evil spirits. Now, the Greeks also believed that the mandrake was an aphrodisiac and could aid in conception. The root would be carried around in a pouch by Greek men, using it as a magical love charm. And actually, the idea of carrying the little bits of the root as a love charm kind of stretches through millennia to kind of early modern times. On occasion, the Greek love goddess Aphrodite was known as she of the Mandragora. Now, the mandrake may have been associated with evil spirits because of its poison. If people observed that eating the mandrake caused delirium, narcosis or death, they might attribute this to a demon living in the plant. This fella here is called Pedanius Discarides. Now he was the father of pharmacy. He existed at the turn of the millennia, so the 1st century AD. He came from a place called Silesia. Now that's eastern Poland, kind of where eastern Poland borders Germany nowadays, yeah? He travelled all over Europe studying plants and writing his findings, and he paid a lot of attention to mandrakes. He described its use once again as a love medicine and as a narcotic anaesthetic. He specifically said that he could render a patient insensitive before performing like an operation like amputating a foot, for example. He also recommended using a paste made from the root for inflammation of the eyes and ulcers. So as well as ingesting it, you could use it topically as an anti-inflammation. This fella here, this is Josiffe. He comes from the same time as Discarides, but he's a Jewish historian, and he was the first to record the practice of using a dog when uprooting the plant in order to protect the gatherer from harm. Now, I happen to be a dog lover, so I don't like this superstition. I'm going to report it, but it's not very nice. So here you go. What you do is you dig a trench around the plant until the hidden part of the root is very, very small. So you try and get it as uprooted as possible. And then you tie a hungry dog to the root, and then you get it to follow you. So you either like put some food just out of reach of the dog, or you just call the dog. And then the dog dies immediately instead of you, and you can now handle the plant safely. This particular dead dog method is something which goes once again for 1,500 years or so as the method of harvesting it. But Josephus also says that you could pour menstrual blood or urine onto the root before harvest as an additional precaution. Josephus states that the plant is able to drive demons out of the possessed, and that was a common belief in the Middle East, that the root could be a remedy for all of the illnesses caused by genies, demons and Satan. It was believed that King Solomon carried a mandrake root in his signet ring as protection, and also that Alexander the Great of Greece carried one for protection. Now the Arabs called the mandrake the devil's candle because its leaves often attracted glowworms, so it appeared to glow in the dark. Now the first mention of the mandrake in England is in a herbarium written around about 1000 AD and translated into Anglo-Saxon from the Latin. Anglo-Saxon healers were known as leeches, and herb lore was known as wort cunning. So whenever you see like plants called butterwort or something like that, that's because wort is kind of Anglo-Saxon for plant. So the wort, which is named mandragora, is mickle. Mickle means big, by the way, and is illustrious in aspect and is beneficial. It shineth at night like a lamp. When first thou seest its head, then inscribe it with a sword instantly, or it will flee. So they believe that it would run away. Its virtue is so great, it will flee from any unclean man with a sword, who, if he's unclean, should also use an ivory staff to clear the earth instead. When thou seest its hands and feet, tie them up. Then take the other end and tie it to a dog's neck and place meat out of reach, except when he jerks up the wort, that's the plant. Immediately wring out the ooze from its leaves into a glass pitcher. Ooze is Anglo-Saxon for juice. Smear the ooze on the forehead for headaches and insomnia. Use the body of the mandrake in warm water for insanity, mania, muscle spasms, witlessness, and demoniacal possession. Also, the Anglo-Saxons say, if any see some heavy mischief in his home, let him take this wort mandragora into the middle of the house, and evil will be compelled from the house. So the plant itself would contain a magical kind of talismanic property. Now, mandrake is not indigenous to Britain. This is this is actually that is mandrake, that's not bryony. But bryony root was sometimes used as a substitute because it resembled the mandrake root in shape. Now, mandrake superstitions are the same as for dormice, were more common in the south of England, probably because they could grow more easily there. In Kent, pieces of the root were carried by women as fertility charms, once again the use of little bits as talisman. Some believe that the mandrake had a human heart and that the mandrake was constantly watched over by Satan. If the mandrake was pulled up at certain holy seasons, the evil spirit in it would appear and do the bidding of the gatherer. You do find this quite a lot in plant law, that when you harvest it is very important to how the properties will be sorted. So particularly Midsummer's Eve is a very good time to harvest any plant. That'll come up later. And in Wales, the mandrake superstitions were interchangeable with that of bryony. Now, the leaves and the fruit were called charnel food, and this is because there's a superstition, which I'll come on to again later, that the mandrake would only grow beside or underneath the gallows tree or near crossroads where suicides were buried. Some believe that they grew from the tears of an innocent man who had been hung on the gallows. When uprooted, the mandrake was said to shriek and groan like a human. Now, this is, I'm going to slightly dot ahead into the future here. Emperor the Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire, so this is kind of more early modern, this is about the 15th century as opposed to what we're talking about here, which is about kind of 13th. He was supposed to have a collection of mandrakes in his palace, which would shriek like babies if they weren't regularly bathed. Anyway, back to medieval times. In medieval times, demand for the mandrake really increased, and mandrake root would often be counterfeited. This is actually a counterfeit mandrake. Bryony root, which I mentioned before, would be carved into mandrake shape and sold for large sums of money. Often other roots would be passed off as mandrakes, and sometimes even dried frogs were passed off as the root. And there's reports of people carving roots and then replanting them so that they could convincingly harvest them to show them, look what I found, something which looks very people-like. Now, in medieval Germany, the beliefs of the power of the mandrake became almost like a cult there. What you have here, by the way, is the mandrake and the womandrake, because there are different varieties of the plant which are different sizes. So mandrake would be the larger plant, the womandrake would be the smaller plant, and it was to do with plant sex. But the medieval Germans, they really went in for mandrakes in a big way. The mannequins made from the root were known as Auraum. In the 16th century in Germany, they were regarded as very rare and only obtainable with great danger. They brought good fortune and they could multiply gold. The trade in them was secret because if you were discovered to own a mandrake, you would be charged as a witch, and the penalties for being charged as a witch were obviously apostasy and most horrible death in Antiquity. If you could imagine being burnt alive as being horrible, which I do. Once acquired, once you got yourself an Auraum, you had to treat it with great care. You had to wrap it in a white cloth or in silk, keep it in a box, and bathe it every Friday, otherwise they would shriek, just like the ones in the Emperor Rudolph's palace. Once acquired, it was really hard to get rid of an Auraum, because you couldn't sell it for less than you bought it for. You had to pay more, you had to sell it for more money you bought it for, otherwise you'd have to keep it. If you threw it away, it would return to you. If you put it in the fire, it would jump out of the fire and just come and be with you. It would pass by inheritance on the death of the father to the youngest son, on the condition that the youngest son buried a little bit of bread and a piece of money with his father's body in the coffin. The Auraum was regarded as a protector of the family and had to be carefully kept and tended. If you neglected the Auraum, your family would get ruin and misfortune. It was not just a fertility charm, as far as the Germans were concerned, but also a rejuvenator. If you owned an Auraum, you could make yourself young or old, or whatever age you wanted, just by wanting it. Now, Al-Rams were connected with the devil. This is a contemporary image, but it kind of fits. If one put an Al-Ram, a mandrake, into a glass bottle, it might change itself into a spider or into a scorpion and forever move. Now, a bottled imp would perform many magical services, but on the owner's death, the imp would drag him to hell. Now, another belief was that if you trusted your Al-Ram more than you trusted God, the devil would enter into it with all of its powers of evil. Now, the French also had strong beliefs in the mandrake. They believed that it could bring you riches, and actually, Joan of Arc was believed to have owned a mandrake for this purpose, and this was one of the allegations which was included in the articles of accusation at her trial as a witch. Now, as I mentioned before, according to French folklore, the mandrake was thought to be a kind of mole. Interestingly, another term for the mandrake in French is main de gloire, which is hand of glory, and there's a whole bunch of other different folk legends about the hand of glory, which kind of comes in when you start to think about the gallows myths. I can talk about hand of glory in the Q&A if you like. Once acquired, the main de gloire would need to be fed daily, otherwise the owner would die. If the owner paid in cash for the food for the plant, each day he would find double that amount of money. The Europe-wide association of the mandrake with the gallows emerged in the 15th century. It was believed that the mandrake would spring up where the body of a criminal had polluted the ground. So basically underneath the gallows, when the criminal died, it was supposed to either have come literally from the seed of the dying man or from his urine. And it would be known as the Galgaman line, the little gallows man. Some legends, as I said before, would say that the dying man must be an innocent. The other would say that he is a hereditary thief. Now, you would harvest the little gallows man either by the dead dog method, or, well, actually, that's the main method. You'd harvest him, and it would be on Midsummer's Eve, which is the time when plants are believed to be invested in mystical virtues. And once again, you would wrap in red and white silk and bathe every Friday. And if you treated him well, the little gallows man would answer any question you put to him, and the owner would have no enemies and many children. And if you laid any money beside the mandrake overnight, double that money will be there in the morning. But you shouldn't overwork him, otherwise he'll die and you will have a lot of misfortune. There's another picture there. This is Isaac Newton. What a great scientist. But he also believed that the mandrake was endued with the spirit of the hanged man from which it came, and that the screams of the mandrake were the screams of the dying man transferred. That's not empirical science. The Italians believed that the mandrake, having a mandrake in your garden would bring good luck. And I'm just going to talk about the Galician Poles for a little bit. The Galician Poles are basically where Ukraine is now, really. They believed that if you injured a mandrake, it would bleed and you would bleed until the mandrake healed. They also believed that to harvest a mandrake, you had to lay money and bread by the mandrake, similar to with the Al-Ram, and then once you'd very carefully removed the mandrake, you'd bury that money and bread. Once again, you'd bathe it and then wrap it up in cloth, put it in the closet. The Poles believed that the mandrake brought safety to the house and was a guardian against thieves and witches. And it was also protecting cattle against witches. But they also thought that if a witch owned a mandrake, she could, if she burnt the mandrake on the first Thursday of the month, what that would do was that 9 fields worth of cows would be drained of milk. Also, the Poles believed that if you let a mandrake grow for 7 years undisturbed, it would emerge from the ground all by itself as a naked child and run after the lady of the house, calling after her, "Mama, Mama." So that's pretty much the folklore of the mandrake. Just to finish off, I'm going to give you a little summary of a summary of its properties, and then talk about Jesus. So, the juice of the root of the mandrake, there are uses for the root of the mandrake, the leaves of the mandrake, and the fruit. So the juice of the root is narcotic. The juice of the leaves can be used as topical anti-inflammatory, and the juice of the fruit is supposed to be aphrodisiac. But you've got to be very careful not to overdose from any of these, because you will fall asleep and you will never wake up, because it's an alkaloid. I mean, in the early 20th century, they experimented with using it as an actual general anaesthetic. But the problem was people kept not waking up. So keeping a root on one's person is a very common belief for fertility. But in Roman times, wine made from the root of the mandrake was known as murion, or death wine. Particularly in Israel, it was given by those who were to be crucified. So crucifixion was a common and brutal Roman punishment, and it was observed by Pliny, the Roman historian, that the women of the great Sanhedrin in Israel would visit prisoners upon the cross and administer to them a sponge containing this death wine. Their sufferings would be allayed by the drug, and they would pass into a death-like sleep. After removal from the cross, quite often people who had been treated with this death wine would wake up. So the Romans were commanded to mutilate the bodies before returning them to their relatives for burial. So it's been suggested that this death wine was administered to Jesus Christ during his agonies on the cross, but who knows? And here's a final picture of, and that concludes my talk. So, before I take questions, just want you to know that the next South East London Folklore Society, which happens on the second Thursday of the month, is going to be on medieval graffiti. If you put your name on the list, then I'll let you know by emailage. Other things that I'll be mentioning on the list. On Wednesday the 1st of August, I'm going to be giving a talk in Southwark Cathedral on a history of beer in Southwark. So we'll be talking about brewing, the hop trade, and also things like small beer, stuff like that, connections with Dickens and Chaucer. I have been home brewing for it, and I've made some small beer. The weather's been really, really hot, and yeast doesn't really like it when it's hot. So I will be issuing a disclaimer that if you do drink the home brew, and you don't feel very well, that's on you. I will sample it the night before, so if I'm not there for the talk, you'll know that it's not good. But yeah, I'll leave details for that in the mail out. The other thing as well, if anybody's interested, on the 23rd of I'll put this on the 23rd of every month at the Crossbones Burial Ground on the Red Crossway over there, there's a ritual for the outcast dead, which is led by everybody's favourite urban shaman, John Crow. And that's a really interesting piece of living folk history. And there's also Crossbones Bards happening as well. But I'll put all of that in the mail out for you. Any questions? Yes.
Could you say something about the connections between Mandrake and the Hand of Glory?
Okay, well, I think the connections will certainly be to do with gallows myths, because the Hand of Glory tends to be the hand of a convicted thief. Once again, like with the Mandrake, it's what's fallen out of a convicted thief, which is cut from his hand. And the whole thing about the Hand of Glory is that what you do as well is that you take a Hand of Glory and you basically pickle it and then sun dry it, and you take fat from the criminal and you make a candle out of that fat and you place it into the Hand of Glory, and then when you light it, it basically means that you can burgle at liberty, because anybody within the house you're burgling will fall into an enchanted sleep. whilst the mandrake doesn't have that property, the fact that it's called Mandrakes in France means that, and you've got the gallows myth as well, means that there must be some connection there. So that's something that I will be looking into a little bit further in future. But they're all following it around kind of gallows myth. Yeah.
Is the mandrake related to ginseng?
Pardon? There are myths about ginseng in China which are very similar to European ideas about mandrake, and you also have folklore about how you harvest ginseng, which is similar with drawing circles around it. You don't get the dead dog thing, but certainly with aphrodisiac properties and stuff like that. There's some discussion about whether the Chinese were aware of mandrake or not, because there were trade routes and stuff like that. But certainly there was beliefs about ginseng having, having kind of similar properties to mandrake. So whether there's an association there or not, it depends on whether the Chinese actually had mandrakes. There's less evidence of them actually cultivating them.
When you start growing it, Chinese do.
Yeah.
So what, you get seeds, or someone give you a cutting, or?
You can grow it from seed. It tends to prefer Mediterranean climates. You've got to be really, really careful of it, because it is of the same family as like the nightshade. So you'll get like atropine and stuff like that, so you could use it. You could certainly use it in a beer. Like you can make beer from henbane. Which will make you a little bit sleepy. You've got to be a bit careful with that stuff, then it'll be hard to stop. You grow it from seed as opposed to from cutting, because it's just quite hard to find. But I'm looking forward to that one. It's going to be next to the lemon tree. So there you go. David.
Where exactly would you find what thing would you find
What the mandrake?
Yeah, that's right.
You find them in gardens, but you don't find them wild. You don't find them wild at all. They have to be cultivated because they are quite delicate, and they do prefer a slightly hotter Mediterranean climate. So a glass house is a better place to grow them. That's why you find the bryony root, which is a similar shape. There's a lot of legends about mandrake, which people will just transfer directly over to bryony. So like in cunning folk practice, for example, people will just use bryony, the same thing. And that concludes the Q&A. And now we can resort to pub conversation. Thank you very much everybody for coming along. And thank you very much, Chris. That was absolutely ace. And look forward to seeing you at another event.